Good morning. Today is Yud Tes Menachem of Tovshin Ayin Daled. We are in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamar Tovshin Yud Aleph Tovshin Yud Beis. In the Mamar of the second day of Shavuos Tovshin Yud Beis. Shehikdimu, and we are on page Shin Yud. And we are up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines from the top. The line starts Horotzen, and we are at the full stop. The Rebbe explained that generally speaking, in the usual course of things, in the usual course of Seder Shavuos, we can only link into or operate within the framework of the Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, which the Tzimtzum touched. In order to arrive, to tap in to the aspect of Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, which the Tzimtzum did not touch, we need avodah. We need work serving Hashem. How? Specifically, not the godly soul on its own, but rather the godly soul interacting with the animal soul. Why? Because by virtue of the revealed and direct sources of the godly soul and the animal soul, respectively, the godly soul is rooted in tikkun, and the animal soul is rooted in toihu, which is higher than tikkun. So therefore, the godly soul needs to rise up and tap into a level of energy that gives it the strength to be able to have some impact on the animal soul, which is otherwise stronger than it. So it's not good enough to operate just in the normal course of things, where the animal soul is rooted higher than the godly soul. It's not good enough to operate even and to tap into a level where the godly soul and the animal soul are equal, but you have to link in to the place all the way back where the godly soul is rooted more deeply and higher than the animal soul. That happens through avodah, and particularly through the godly soul impacting the animal soul, that it should have Mesiras Nefesh, should give away its will, which is usually has a tendency to be involved in physicality and materialism. When it sets itself aside and it focuses, feels anguish from being involved in all of this gashmiyas and chumriyas, and turns towards elikus, towards godliness, that in turn also infuses the godly soul with this aspect of Mesiras Nefesh, and by virtue of this exercise, the godly soul taps into these levels which are way beyond the normal course of things. And to use the terminology of the Rebbe, it taps into the Ein Sof Shaloi Noga by HaTzimtzum, that the Tzimtzum did not touch, which are the levels of Ein Sof, which are even beyond what he termed the Rotzen HaMuchlot, the highest level of Hashem's desire to create worlds. This taps into even levels that are beyond that. It taps into the level of B'min Nimlach V'nishim Seim Shal Tzadikim, as Chazal say, who did Hashem consult with concerning the creation of the world? With the souls of tzaddikim, of the righteous. So in other words, it taps into a level of godliness which is even beyond Hashem's most innate, initial will for creations for the creation of worlds.
Just a question. How can it be that the higher levels, I mean, I understand, how can it be the higher levels contain, since the animal soul is more of a concealment? I mean, I know the process, but theoretically, the higher the level, the
more holy it is.
Theoretically, I understand the way it works, that drop down, all that.
Shviras HaKelim, yeah. Well, the way it is in Toihu, it's not an animal soul at all. It's the Shviras HaKelim process, it's that falling process that turns it into Klipa V'Sitracha. For example...
But since the root of the animal soul is so high...
Give you an example.
Yeah.
Is this working? Can't see what's going on over here.
What do you see?
I think it is working. Yeah, it's working. Hope it's working. I see a dot in the middle. Anyway, one of the Hisboneniyos contemplations. That's not the exact translation of Hisbonenus, but meditations, or one of the things to focus on when you say Krishma, Shashachris, Birchas Krishma Shashachris, we talk about the angels, and we say how the angels say Kodesh, 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 and then we say V'Efanim B'Chayis HaKodesh. The angels called Efanim and the holy beasts, the Arash Gadol with great noise, Misnasim, L'Sosrofim, and they say Baruch Hashem, Baruch Kved Hashem Mekayim, and so on. What's the point of all of this? So it says in Chassidus, that one of the reasons for this is bonus for this text is that at that point you should think about the fact you're talking to the Nefesh Abamis. You Nefesh Abamis are rooted in such high levels, and its source. You're called Chayes HaKodesh, the holy beast, to completely bottle Telakus. How do you become so coarse and get yourself involved in materialism and the Gashmias? Right? What's the point? The point is that it's not just usual Ishtalshalos, it's a process. That's why it's called Shviras HaKelim, that's why it's called falling, because it falls. The bigger you are, the harder you fall. Right? And this is a recurring theme. Esav and Yaakov. Why did Yitzchak have an affinity with Esav more than with Yaakov, it seemed, because he looked at Esav how it was in his source. And in his source, you're talking about Elam Atayus. Elam Atayus is such tremendous bittul, it's even more bittul than Atzilis. Mm-hmm. Right? But that happens through the process of the falling. That's why it's called falling. Okay? So that's what we're up to. Now, tomorrow.
Late.
So over here the Rebbe went into the Nekuda of Ratzon HaMuchlat, that Hashem has this innate, almost constant and always extant Ratzon desire called Ratzon HaMuchlat, the highest level of Ratzon from worlds, right? Which mirrors itself down here below. For a person being so innately identified with having a home. But the Rebbe explained that Lamaila, above, it's by choice, even the Ratzon HaMuchlat, and Lamata, once Hashem chooses it, it becomes already a factor. Now, how this choice that Hashem makes to have this decisive, innate desire for worlds, Ratzon HaMuchlat, at the highest levels of Insof, says the Rebbe, is a result of the fact that he consults with Neshamas of Tzaddikim that are rooted even beyond the Ratzon HaMuchlat. They're rooted in the very Atzmos Ein Sof, the very essence of the Ein Sof, of the infinity. So that's what we're up to. Line starts with Ratzon at the full stop. And it's at this in this level that Magas Avodah the Bitter Nefesh Avam is that the refinement of the animal soul reaches. When the godly soul works with the animal soul, it taps into that level, to the level of Ein Sof, which is even beyond the level of the Ratzon HaMuchlat. The decisive will, we tap into the level of the Baal HaRatzon, the owner of the will. Why? Because it is from this aspect of the Ein Sof that the power, the strength for this type of avodah, of serving Hashem, that the godly soul attains its power from that level. Because otherwise, it's either equal to the animal soul or it's inferior to the animal soul. And it's in this aspect of the Ein Sof that there is the intention and the will of Hashem for the general idea of serving Hashem through refining the animal soul. Right? Here the Rebbe touches a theme that we already learned. What does it mean that in this level you have the Hashem's intent and desire for the Avodah, the service of refining the animal soul? Meaning in which level? In the Atzmos Ein Sof, right? Here we go into the theme, whether or not Hashem actually needs our Avodah. And that's something where we learned Harris, in the famous Mamar, and the Rebbe actually uses very similar terminology. What's the idea? Because concerning the general concept of serving Hashem, we find contradictions in the saying of our sages. The Lefa'amim is sometimes it is brought in the sages bring Meisifim Keichel Gvura, that when at the time when the Jewish people fulfill Hashem's will, they add strength and power and strength. Where Kavyochel and Hashem, Shene'amar, as it says in the verse in Parshas Shlach, Moshe Rabbeinu davens to Hashem after the Jews sin with the spies. He says, "Va'ata yigdal l'koyach adnai," and now may the strength of Hashem become greater. So we see that that through tefillah, through man's serving Hashem, he can expand Hashem's power, as it were. So it seems that man's service does have an impact above, in a positive sense. And so too, the lack of serving Hashem seems to have a negative impact above. When Hashem's will is not done, so to speak, we weaken the strength, the celestial strength. Shenemar, as it says in the verse in Parshas Hazinu, Tzur Yilot Choteshi, the rock that has given birth to you, Teshi. And one of the interpretations of Teshi is from expression of Toshash, making weaker. And the Rashi over there says, brings from Chazal, from our sages, that when Hashem's will is not fulfilled, his strength becomes weaker. Hainu, which seems that our service is needed above, is for the necessity of above. Meaning to say that our Aveda either adds or lack of Aveda detracts from the spiritual strength. It strengthens or weakens the spiritual energy. That's what we see sometimes. And sometimes we find in our sages statements like, why does it matter? Why does Hashem care? Etc. And the expression is, why does Hashem care if we slaughter an animal from the neck or we slaughter it from the nape? What difference does it make? So the answer is, mitzvahs were only given for the purpose of refining created beings. So it's a contradiction. On the one hand, it seems that our serving Hashem does have an impact above, negatively or positively, depending on whether or not we fulfill Hashem's will. On the other hand, it seems that it makes no difference whatsoever, and it's just for the purpose of what? Of us being refining ourselves. So what's the answer? How do we happily marry up these two statements to coexist? So it is explained concerning this in the famous Avodas HaKodesh, which is brought in the Shalah HaKodesh very extensively. The statements such as when our sages say, why does it matter? It doesn't matter to Hashem, etc. Koi, this is a reference al odin yachid, to the singular master, sheresh hasharoshim, the root of roots. Remember this language? This is a reference to exactly this level that we're talking about here above, that the Nefesh Elokis taps in order to have its Aveda for the Nefesh Abamis. We're talking about a level of the essence of the infinite light, which is beyond the level of the infinite light where Hashem's desire for created worlds begins. So over there, at that level, it makes no difference at all. It's only in the levels of godliness that clothe themselves in worlds that our serving Hashem is meaningful. That is what it says in Avodas HaKodesh and in the Shalah. However, the Rebbe says, Omnam, from the fact that the question is, what does it matter? And then the answer is, nevertheless, the mitzvahs were given to refine created beings. Move on, it's understood. It's understood that even at the level of the singular master, the root of all roots, which means the atzmos Ein Sof, right, which is beyond Hashem's desire for worlds. What in fact doesn't he care about? It means what he doesn't care about is just the service itself on its own. Meaning, what doesn't matter to him over there is the nefesh, the godly soul's aveda. In other words, the serving of Hashem, if it would be just from the godly soul alone. But the refinement of created beings, that comes about through the service of the godly soul, meaning to say, its interaction, bitter nefesh abamis, the interaction of the godly soul with the animal soul to refine it. This does matter above, even where at the level of adin yachid sheresh hasharoshim, even at the level of the singular master, the root of roots, the level of godliness, the level of Atzmos Ein Sof, the essence of the infinite light, which is beyond Hashem's desire for worlds. Why? Because otherwise, why is He giving mitzvahs? What's the point? The answer is He's giving it in order to refine the Brias, in order for the godly soul to work with the animal soul. So the question is, does it matter if the godly soul serves Hashem on its own? Answer, no. What does matter is for the godly soul to impact and to work with the animal soul. The Tamadovar, the reason is, what's the reason? Why indeed does it matter? What's the reason? Lefishakain, this is a very interesting expression, Lefishakain hoya, because this is what was Harotzoin Hatoher, the pure will, V'hachefetz HaKadosh, and the holy desire. Of whom? Of Hashem. Li Yisir Fabriz Dafket, that there should specifically be the refinement of creatures. In other words, it's almost identical to Hashem's desire for worlds altogether. When we say Nis'ava HaKadosh Baruch Hu Li Yis Baruch Lir B'Tachteinim, Hashem had a desire, if you will, even a lust, if you will. Nis'ava is a taiva, right? Almost an irrational desire. In other words, an inexplicable desire for creating the worlds. What does that mean? To have a dwelling place down here below. How? Not by the godly soul working with itself to be connected to Hashem, but rather for the godly soul to make a dwelling place for Hashem in this world. How? By refining the animal soul. So what's the reason? That's the way He wanted it, this Ava. Or the terms He uses over here, Harotzoin HaToher V'Achevitz HaKadosh. The pure desire and the holy, the pure will and the holy desire. When we say moving from this, it's understood. So what's the bottom line? What do we see from all of this? So we see from this is understood that the service of the godly soul, the work that the godly soul does to refine the animal soul, which is the idea of refining created beings, which is the answer of the Chazal give lenitna mitzvahs elkei tarif v'misabrius magaz b'bechinas atzmos ein sof shekoydem alei sorotzen. It touches, it reaches where? The aspect of the essence of the infinite light, which is beyond the level of the infinite light and where Hashem's desire for worlds begins. In other words, it reaches Baal HaRotzen, the owner of the will. Who's the owner of the will? Hashem Himself. Atzmos Ein Sof. So B'meila, for the purpose of working with Shabbamis, the godly soul reaches a level which is beyond, in a conscious way. Of course, it's rooted there. But through the Aveda, it takes those essential, usually unreachable aspects of godliness and taps into them and brings them down into our consciousness. Now, going back to the original question, if you remember, here we come full circle. Going back to the original question, the Rebbe asked in the beginning, Shehikdimu Yisrael Nasa Nishma. The Chazal say that, sages say that when the Yidden said Nasa before Nishma, the angels stood up and gave him 2 crowns, one for Nasa and one for Nishma. So the Rebbe says, on the one hand, this seems to be a contradiction. On the one hand, it seems that the crowns were received for what purpose? For saying Nasa and Nishma. One for Nasa and one for Nishma. On the other hand, it seems that they got the 2 crowns for Nasa and for Nishma only because they said Nasa before Nishma. So if that's the case, so the Rebbe explained that the reason why we got 2 crowns for Nasa and Nishma is only because we said Nasa before Nishma. So if that's the case, says the Rebbe, if the result of saying Nasa before Nishma was that you got 1 crown for Nasa and one crown for Nishma, we should certainly get a crown, a 3rd crown, for actually saying Nasa before Nishma, because that caused us to get 1 for Nasa and 1 for Nishma. So the Rebbe, in fact, said that, in fact, there are 3 crowns. It's just that 2 crowns we received, and 1 crown Hashem kept for Himself. Right? What does it mean? And what does it mean Hashem kept for Himself? That crown was actually put on Hashem's head, Kaviyochel, by us saying Nasa before Nishma. So there was 1 crown. All the crowns came about our effort, as it were, right? But one of them we put on Hashem's head. The saying Nasa before Nishma causes this crown, whatever it is, this high level, to be put on Hashem's head. Now that I was going to explain. Chapter 8. According to this, we can explain the idea of the 3 crowns. If you remember, the Rebbe brought from the Medrash, Moshe Lamelech, that he made 3 crowns. 2 crowns he put on his children's head, and 1 crown he put on his own head. So the Rebbe says the two crowns that were put on the children's heads, Shem Shnei Aksorim, Shekeneged Nasa, Keneged Nishma, these are the two crowns that were given for Nasa and one for Nishma. So there's also, in addition to these two, Yesh Negam Keser HaGimel, there's also the third crown, Shenot HaLam Melech V'Nosam Bereishit, that the king takes and he puts it on his head. Which is that crown? Shehu Keneged Inyan, the Hakdamas Nasa and Nishma, Kanal Sif Beis, which is, as a result, and corresponds to the prefacing Nasa before Nishma, as explained above in chapter 2. Was the Pshat? The idea in this is the Hakdamas Nasa and Nishma, prefacing Nasa before Nishma. What does that mean? Nasa means we will do, Nishma means we will understand. So when you say I will do, before I say I will understand, it's the idea of Inyan Bittul. It's the idea of Bittul. I set myself aside. Whatever you say, right? Bittul to whom? Lebal HaRotzen Dafke. This is not Bittul to Hashem's will, this is Bittul to Hashem, to the Baal HaRotzen. Why? Because you don't even know what he wants. He comes and he says, look, I'm about to give you business. Whatever you say, what's the pshat? I don't even know what's going to be, what I'm going to be instructed, and I'm already bottled. I'm already nullified. So who am I nullified to? Hashem himself. Sheshom magas avedis abesiris hanefesh. The beauty of nefesh habam is she bekeich atzmus sheshom mishrosh mishom Yisrael kanal simsayin. And it's there in the Baal HaRotzen, in Hashem himself, that this work of the Mesiras Nefesh, the service of Mesiras Nefesh, of the giving away of the soul, that takes place in the animal soul, and by virtue of that is reflected back onto the godly soul, that reaches where, as we just explained it very much at length, into the very essential levels of God, of Hashem, Atzmas and Yisof, where the souls of Yidden are rooted in the level of Ad in Yachid Sheirish HaSharoshim, as explained above in chapter 7. Moving from this is understood, Shegam Keser HaGimel Shayach B'nai Yisrael. If the Avodah of a Yid, of the Nefesh L'Kis with Nefesh Abamis, taps into those essential levels of godliness, the Ein Sof, which is beyond the Rotzim, beyond Hashem's will for world, it's understood that the third crown is also something which is associated with us, with our work. Why? Because it comes about through what? Through the Avodah, through the service of Yidden. Which Avodah? Shehikdimu Nasa Nishma. That they prefaced Nasa before Nishma. Meaning to say, bittul to whom? The nullification to the Baal HaRotzen, to Hashem himself. However, if you look at the expression of the Medrash, if you look at the language of the Medrash, it says, what? If you remember, he mentioned before, in chapter 2, in the second part of chapter 2, he said that in the Kedoshim Tiki, when he brought the three crowns, he says the celestial ones say three Kedushas every day, which is what? Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish. The Malach, I mean, it's a reference to the angels, that they say Kaddish 3 times, right? And what does the Abish to do with these 3 times Kaddish, which is the 3 crowns? 2 he puts on this children's head and our head, and 1 he takes for himself. Here we seem to, what the Rebbe is saying is that all the crowns come as a result of what? Of the Avodah of Yidden. And in the Medrash it says it's the angels, right? And then Hashem puts it on our head and 1 for himself. And although in the Medrash it says it's the celestial ones that crown him, right? Meaning the angels. The Koyal Malachim, it's a reference to angels. Says the Rebbe is a goof at all of Yisrael Dafke. The fact that the angels are able to take these crowns and put it on Hashem's head is also dependent on us. K'mayim Razal, as the sages say, Ein Malachi Asharis Emrim Shira Lamayla Acha Yemer Yisrael Lamata. The sages say in the Gemara in Chulin that the angels above, the hosts of heaven, cannot sing their song above until we sing that below. We have to say it first. So until we say Kaddish, the angels can't say Kaddish. Shenemar, as it says in the verse in Eve, Beron Yachad, Keich V'Beker, when the stars of morning sing together. And who are the stars, the morning stars? Rashi says over there, Yisrael HaMishulim L'Kechavim. This is a reference to Yidden who are compared to the stars, right? It says many times that Yidden were compared to the stars. So when the morning stars sing together, then the next part of the pasuk says, all the children of God sing out. Who are Bnei Elikim? The angels. So in other words, the angel song is dependent on whom? On our song. We have to sing first. First we say Kaddish, and only then the angels are able to do it. And so too we say in the Kedusha of Musaf, Keser yitul chamalachim amayne ma'ila, a crown will be given to you. By whom? By the multitude of angels above. The Amcha Yisrael kavutzi mata, and your Jewish nation who are gathered down here below. What does it mean? Hainu sheshnei machtirim. Indeed, these crowns are actually fashioned and come about through whom? Through both a joint venture between the angels and the Jewish people down here below. Aval ha'ikir, but who is the main partner in this joint venture? Hey neshamas Yisrael. It's the souls of Yidden specifically. Why? So the Rebbe now comes beautifully to explain another couple of lines, and then we'll stop. The Yuvan up much in his body. This will be understood based on what we explained above in chapter 7, the difference between angels and malachim and hosts. If you remember, angels are created bidvar Hashem shamayim nasu uveruach piv kol tzvam. Angels are rooted in where? In Hashem's speech, so to speak, right? Which means that they are in a mode of existence. They are a separate entity in existence, kaviyochol, outside of Hashem, so to speak, right? And it's that existence that becomes bottled, that is nullified to Hashem. Mash'enk in Neshamas, this is not the case. Concerning souls, they are entities that their whole DNA, their whole makeup is, they are entities that are bottled to Lakus. It's not that there is a created being, that is nullified to Hashem. No. A neshama is, if you want to describe a neshama, it's not a created entity that becomes bottled to Lakus, it's a entity of bittul. That's what it is. Hashem emanated, created, made an entity of bittul. That's what it is. That's what a neshama is. Bittul to whom? To Elokus. Dveikus to whom? To Elokus. Nullified to godliness, cleaving to godliness. That's what it is. Why? As he explained earlier, and as he will go even more over here, that neshamas Yisrael, unlike angels, angels are created by Ruach Piv, the utterance of Hashem. And as he mentioned before, that angels have bodies, spiritual bodies, but bodies come from the foundation of fire and from a combination of the foundation of fire and water and air. So they have a body and a soul. Neshama is pure godliness. Why? Because the neshama comes from machshava, from Hashem's thought. What's the difference between thought and speech? Thought is for myself. Speech means I recognize that there's somebody else, unless I'm a little cuckoo. But in the normal course of things, you speak to someone else. So in other words, there is someone else, and you're communicating with that one. So when you say something is created from Hashem's speech, so to speak, it means it's from a level where there is a recognition that there's another entity. So therefore the malachim are created in a way that they're a metzias, they exist. That's built into the root from where they come. When you say machshava, it's for myself. So what comes about? What kind of creature, if you will, what kind of entity comes into being through Hashem's thought? A being that is completely united and focused on Hashem. That's a neshama. So because the bittul of a neshama is so much deeper and so much more innate than the bittul of the malachim, it's because of that in this joint venture between the malachim and the neshamas to crown Hashem, that the senior partner, as it were, is who? The neshama rather than the malach. So even though even though it says that it's the malachim that give the crown, but really and truly it's jointly with the Yidden, and even more so, mainly by the Yidden. As the Rebbe will explain in Mitzvah Shem later on in the Maimer.
On Sunday,
in Mitzvah Shem on Sunday. And hopefully we will finish the Maimer then, and we will rapidly move on to the next Maimer of Pasha Shlach. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Don't forget the Tchof of Shabbos. The Rebbe's father's 70th Yortzeit.